Hey everyone, and welcome to this month's Understanding ADHD speaker series. This event is brought to you by our ADHD Empowerment Meetup community and CHAD, Children and Adults with ADHD of Greater Los Angeles, a nonprofit that's all about supporting and advocating for folks like us who live with ADHD. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Suzanne Sophos. I'm the executive director. As someone who lives with ADHD and is raising an incredible son on the same journey, I just want to say you're in the right place. Feel free to say hi in the chat and let us know where you're tuning in from, and maybe share a bit about how ADHD touches your life. Today's webinar is just one of the many ways we're working to educate, support, and advocate for adults and children with ADHD. We've been running this speaker series for nearly a decade now, bringing the best experts straight to our community. It's a chance to learn, connect, and feel a little less alone on this journey. But we don't stop at webinars or live events. We've built a whole community that's here for you, whether you're looking for peer support, accountability, or just a space to be yourself. We run online peer support groups for adults, those dealing with ADHD and addiction, young women with ADHD, parents of kiddos with ADHD. We also have weekly meetups for body doubling and co-working, plus a journaling and meditation group. And if you're looking for a more casual way to connect, we have a private Discord chat community. Just ask for the link in the chat if you'd like to join. All of our upcoming events are listed in our meetup community, so make sure you check that out. You can find a link to join that at chadla.org. Everything we do is made possible by our amazing volunteers and the generosity of folks like you. We're on a mission to make ADHD education and support accessible to everyone, no matter their financial situation. So that's why our events are free. But as a nonprofit, we really do rely on donations and membership fees to keep going. So if you feel connected to our cause and want to help out, we'd be so grateful for any contribution. $10, $15, or whatever you can give. You'll find the donation link in the chat, or you can scan the QR code on your screen. And if you want to get more involved, have more support, and be a part of the biggest advocacy network in the country for ADHD, you can join CHAD. Consider becoming a member. You can learn more on our website, and there's a QR code to both make a donation or to join CHAD on the page. Now, just a quick note to help us make the most of our time together. Please keep yourself muted during the presentation, but feel free to jump into the chat whenever you like. You can share your thoughts, ask questions, and engage with the community. If you do have a question for our speaker, please drop it in the chat anytime. Our moderators will gather them up for a Q&A at the end. Before we introduce our speaker, I want to take a minute just to talk about ADHD from a holistic perspective. ADHD is a lifelong neurodevelopmental condition that affects how our brains manage executive functions, things like attention, focus, self-regulation, and emotional regulation. These things can be tough for us, often requiring us to get creative in how we approach even the simplest daily tasks. Research has shown that without proper diagnosis and well-rounded support, the challenges of ADHD can have serious consequences, including reducing life expectancy by up to 13 years. This happens mainly because of impulsivity and lack of self-awareness, which can lead to risky behaviors, accidents, substance abuse, and even suicide. These traits also make it harder to manage health conditions like cardiovascular disease and obesity, which require strong executive function to manage. But here's the hopeful part. With early diagnosis and a holistic approach to treatment, we can significantly reduce the risks and live amazing lives. ADHD impacts every area of our lives, so our approach to managing it needs to be just as comprehensive. A holistic treatment plan includes ADHD education, skills training, medical treatment, and peer support. When ADHD is addressed comprehensively, the results can be life-changing, leading to an amazing, fuller, longer life. Let's dive a little deeper into executive functions. You can think of executive function as your brain's mission control center. It's the part in charge of getting stuff done. And it really comes down to three key areas. Self-control. This is about more than just keeping our impulses in check. It's how we regulate our emotions, ignore distractions, resist temptations, and stay on track toward our goals, no matter how tough things get. This shows up as the inability to regulate our emotions, being easily distracted, frequently giving in to temptations, seeking immediate gratification, having difficulty starting tasks, and maintaining focus, as well as impulsivity. Next is working memory. You can think of this as your mental sticky notes. It's the ability to keep information in mind. Imagine yourself reaching a goal and coaching yourself along the way. It helps us plan, organize, and remember the steps needed to achieve important tasks. This shows up as forgetting information, being disorganized, losing track of our progress, struggling to solve problems, and having difficulty retaining new information. Last is mental flexibility. This one's all about adaptability. It's how we shift gears, think about things from different perspectives, and find creative solutions when the road gets bumpy. It shows up as struggling with change, rigid thinking, difficulty problem solving and switching tasks, frequently being overwhelmed by responsibilities, having a hard time handling uncertainty, and inflexible thinking. When these three functions work together, they help us manage our thoughts, emotions, and actions, allowing us to set and achieve the goals that matter most to us. This brings us to some of the specific challenges that we face. You'll see them listed on the left side of your screen. Executive function development continues until sometime between the ages of 20 and 29, and even then, we often top out a bit behind our neurotypical peers. But here's the good news. Even though our executive function is delayed and impaired, it can still be strengthened and developed. You can think of these skills like a muscle. You can work on them at any age. Along with medication or other treatments, getting executive function coaching, occupational therapy, or creating systems to help you get things done can be key ways to build these skills even long after your 20s. It is with great pleasure that I get to introduce you to our speaker today, Dr. Daniella Karidi. She's the founder of ADHD Time, an executive and ADHD coaching practice specializing in empowering individuals with ADHD to achieve success and fulfillment. She is also a dear friend and colleague, as well as fellow member of the board of directors for CHAD of Greater Los Angeles. She is a frequent speaker at the International ADHD Conference, and in fact, this very presentation was standing room only at this year's conference last November. So we are truly excited to be able to bring this presentation and Daniella to our community. I also want to share that in her work, Daniella supports diverse populations across pivotal life transitions, including college transitions, career advancements, and retirement. She's basically brilliant. She has a PhD from Northwestern University with a focus on memory and ADHD, as well as her master's degree in learning disabilities. And you can find out more about Daniella and reach her directly through her website, ADHDtime.com.
So, hi, thank you for the introduction and thank you for having me here. And I'm going to be talking about how to remember the future, and specifically that's prospective memory. I'm Daniella, and I got to this topic when I was doing my PhD. My professor, we were looking at research topics, and he was very frustrated with me for being always late, missing appointments, coming without stuff. So we kind of got into the topic of memory because I was failing in my prospective memory. These are my munchkins. One of them is now in college, and the other one's still in school, and they have been teaching me a lot about being a parent, about having ADHD as a parent, about raising a teenager with ADHD. So they are a lot of my inspiration. And this is Humphrey that keeps me alive and makes me go for walks. And I think that it's very important to have something like that in your life. And people ask me a lot how I got into my other favorite topic, which is retirement. And I think that in retirement, we have a major problem if we don't get a day off. You know, when you're retired, every day is like the same. There's no, so that kind of what led me to work about the transitions in retirement. So what are we going to be talking about today? We are going to be talking about what is memory. Now, I just want to clarify that I used to teach memory at university level in 2 semesters. So I'm going to try to give you an intro to an intro to an intro of memory, okay? Then we're going to talk about specifically prospective memory. Then we're going to talk about our favorite topic, ADHD and prospective memory. I promise that you're going to leave with at least 2 tips. I'm going to give you more, but at least 2 of them you're going to try to take home. And if you're able at the end during the Q&A to put some of your takeaways, I really appreciate that. And I will remind you. On the left side, on your screens, you might see a QR code with a little running brain. That can lead you to a cheat sheet about memory types in case like everything I talked about was too much, too quick. You didn't take notes very well. You can use that QR code. It should lead you to my mailing list and also to get a cheat sheet about memory. Before I continue, I'm going to ask you guys for 2 little favors. One is when you see a tree in my presentation, it will really help me if you guys can raise your hands if your video is on, or just write the word tree in the chat. I also need someone to tell me when we hit the 22 minutes. All of you, one of you, just please let me know when we hit the 22 minutes. Okay. I cannot see the chat at all at the moment. I don't know where it disappeared to. So when those things come up in the chat, if someone can tell me if their tree or the 22 minutes come up, if someone can let me know, that would be great. First thing I want everyone to know about memory is it's complex, okay? It requires several stages. There's many types of memory and many ways memory can fail. We think about forgetting and memory as like this black and white thing, but it's not. There's a lot of different things. I also want to say that we will not survive in today's modern life if we didn't forget some stuff. There are actually a few people in some mental institutions, unfortunately, that are there because they have a condition where they cannot forget. So imagine remembering every smell, every touch, every word, every sight you see every moment. That can overload your systems. So forgetting is healthy. When forgetting becomes less healthy is what we're going to be talking about later, but forgetting by itself is not the enemy. We don't want to remember everything. Now, there's a lot of reasons why people fail in remembering things. And there's a lot of reasons why people succeed. And we're going to try to talk about it. And we're going to try to shift the conversation about supporting and succeeding in our memory, not so much about always how we forget. So what did I mean when I mean memory has different stages? So memory has 3 basic stages when we're talking about memory. We're talking about encoding information, storing the information, and retrieving the information, right? So I hear a song, I take those sounds in my brain, I interpret them into a way that my brain can store that information, and then I get to retrieve that information. Next time I hear that tune, I can say, oh, I recognize that song. So that is the step of the retrieval. When we talk about types of memory, the most common type that everyone can think about is the division between short-term memory and long-term memory. So when we talk about short-term memory, we're talking about the brain is able to hold very, very, very short amounts of information. And we're talking about brief periods. Short-term memory is up to 300 seconds, which is 5 minutes. But really, 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 we're talking about 0 to 1 minute. 0 to 1 minute is how short our short-term memory is. And when we talk about short-term memory, we talk about very small chunks. So, when you look at a phone number, people wonder why the phone numbers are set in the way they're set today. You have 3, and then you have 3, and then you have 4. That's because our memory capacity has been shown in studies to be up to 7 items. 2 plus minus those 7 items. So in order for us to remember these long numbers, they divided them into these chunks. So our short-term memory is limited. It is very, very short, okay? And it has one purpose. It is temporary storage. Nothing is supposed to stay in the short term for a long term. It is like an in-between. So when we're thinking about information, if I tell you, hi, my name is Daniella, and you want to try to remember that name, and you're going to yourself and you say, oh, Daniella, redhead, ADHD, memory, conference, like you put those things and then you turn around, that's it. That turnaround, that minute, that's what we had to code the information, store the information, and then potentially at some point in the future, when you see me, retrieve the information. So now let's talk about working memory. We talked a bit about it in the intro. Working memory is a type of a short-term memory, but the biggest difference is this word working. It has to have some manipulation on it. So if I tell you, can you remember a series of numbers, 165, and you repeat the numbers 165, that's just short-term memory. But if I tell you, can you tell me those numbers in an opposite order? That is requiring manipulation. I'm showing you two ties and I ask you make a choice. A choice is a manipulation. So if I'm taking information and I want you to process it and make a manipulation, then that means that you need to be able to use your working memory. There's a working that's happening. That's kind of the name is in the trick. Working memory is also very, very short. It has to be in that 0 to 1 minute window. And it also has very limited capacity. We're not going to calculate our taxes in our short-term working memory, okay? It really has a limitation. Working memory is critical for success in all the other types of decision-making, planning, organization that we do in everyday life. Because if we can't hold two pieces of information and compare between them, manipulate them, use them, then we can't make decisions. Okay. Sensory memory, what is that? So that is also part of a short-term memory, and that relates to the hearing, the feeling, the tasting, the touching of information. And this is so short. If I say we passed a second, we already lost this. Like this is from like 0 to a second. Very, very short. Are we aware of our sensory memory? Usually we're not aware of it unless we're losing it. So when are you aware of a sensory memory? People that lost their sense of smell and during Corona and during COVID, suddenly everyone was talking about this memory of senses and this feeling of senses and how much we use it because people were losing it. But on our everyday basis, we're not aware because if we were paying attention to this, we couldn't focus on the information that it creates. So this is something we really do automatically. Long-term memory. So long-term memory is about longer than a minute, information that we are storing from hours to a lifetime. And this is very funny because people think, what do you mean? Short-term is up to the minute and long-term is everything else? And I'm like, yeah, researchers were not very creative when they made this decision. Yes. So short-term, very, very short, long-term, everything else. When we talk about long-term memory, because it is complex, we want to make it different categories within it, and we can talk about explicit and implicit memories, or I'm not going to try to say it. I'm going to say, I didn't say this before, I have ADHD myself. I'm also diagnosed with dyslexia, and English is not my first language, so some of these words, I'm just going to let you read. Have fun. So implicit memory is the unconscious memories that influence our behaviors, and they involve motor skills, like typing, like riding a bike, like speaking. Those are the motor skills that we're using in order to do things in our everyday life that we're not aware when we're doing them. We're not thinking as much. So when a kid learns to type, it's explicit. When the kid already knows how to type and they're doing it automatically, it becomes implicit. I give the best example I like to give is for me driving now. I've been driving for whatever years. We're not going to get into the details, but many. I don't think about it. It comes automatic. At this point, it's a implicit memory. I'm just doing it. But if there's a snowstorm outside or if it's raining, suddenly I'm aware. I'm thinking about the actions I'm doing. Suddenly I have to turn off the radio. Suddenly I need to give it my energy, my attention. Suddenly it's becoming an explicit task. So even though something belongs in one category, surprise, surprise, it can move back and forth. What are explicit memories? These are more conscious facts and events, like the fact that this tower here on the right is an Eiffel Tower and is from Paris. That is knowledge, memories. I got the pleasure of visiting there once, so I can even think about it when I see that photo. So those are more about facts, okay? Let's get to another type of definition. Let's divide it even more. Semantic memories. These are memories that are about the world, like the meaning of objects. These are, again, types of long-term memory. We're taking the explicit memory and we're dividing it into more categories because we can. And this is the example of, like, dog is a type of an animal. That knowledge that we have, hopefully, is a semantic memory. What is an episodic memory? This is about my personal experience with my personal dog. Okay, so this is about a specific time, a specific place, a specific context, a specific event. If someone asks you, hey, how was dinner last night with your friends? That would be an episodic memory. You're trying to remember an episode, like kind of like when I was teaching this to the students, they would like, you know, like an episode in TV, and they're like, no, like shorts on social media. And they're like, oh, okay, we get that. So that is kind of like, it had to be like, this is like a specific case of this. Not all dogs in the world, but my specific dog at a specific time in a specific place. And autobiographic memory is a combination of these things. So it's not only my specific dog. It's like if you ask me, hey, when did you get that dog? And I kind of smile and think, oh, when I moved to LA in 2018. That is an autobiographical information about myself. There's some researchers that like to talk about autobiographical memories that are about categories that you belong to. So like your ADHD tribe or your LA tribe or your family tribe. There's people that like to make this autobiographical like a little bigger, but it always has something that is about you. The word kind of you should be in there. It's not in there, but it should. Okay. So what is prospective memory? Prospective memory is another type of long-term memory because it's more than a minute. And this is our ability to execute previously formed intentions. It's remembering to remember. And my best example is if I tell you, oh, take your medication 7 in the morning tomorrow. Or next time you see me, make sure to say hello from Bob. Those are intentions that need to happen in a future when a specific cue happens. We need that in today's life to be able to do anything. Ooh, I'm blinking, right? Like, I'm like, okay, I'm back. Okay. We need that to be able to do any future, you know, if you tell your spouse you're going to take out the trash, that is a future intention, and hopefully you do that. Those things are critical for our everyday life. Now, again, we like to divide things into categories. So here's another division, prospective memory. And this is about the cue that executes it. So if we want to talk about how we remember things in the future, there's 2 different major cues, event-based cues. Hey, when I pass the grocery store, I want to buy milk. The cue is the grocery store, or when you see the mailbox, put in the letter. So there's an event or a thing that has to happen for us to be able to execute the cue, the memory. So this refers to the cue that cues the event that cues the memory. Or a time-based, take your medication at 7 a.m., join the Zoom at 5 p.m. Those are time-based executions. So when do I need to do this? I need to take out the lasagna in 45 minutes. That is my cue to do something. The time itself serves as a cue. So what do you guys think? I'm going to try to open the chat in a way that I can see it. What do you guys think? Do individuals with ADHD struggle in prospective memory? Yes, tree. Thank you to all of you that noticed the tree. What kind of task was that? Was that event-based or time-based? Yep, that was an event-based prospective memory task. I said, when you guys see a tree, you need to do something. So I gave you a clue, and the clue was execute, write the word tree or raise your hand when you see the tree. And you guys wrote, for those that are seeing the recording, people wrote tree in the chat. Basically, they executed an event-based prospective memory task. What do you guys think? Do people with ADHD struggle in prospective memory? Yes. Let's start with yes. If this is the only thing that you leave today is the knowledge that you are not alone in your struggle with performing tasks in the future and with your memory. But when I started my research in 2011, when I asked that question, first thing people kind of like, I didn't, like, they were like, the academic world looked at me and like, well, we don't know. We just don't know. So here's what we do know now, and then I'll tell you a bit about my experiment that I did. So, we do know that prospective memory needs executive functions to be able to perform. Okay, they are a critical process that in order, you guys needed to look for the tree, and then you needed to execute a task, and that requires executive functions. And we started the conversation today saying that executive functions in ADHD are the weak point. They suck, basically. So we shouldn't be surprised that prospective memory is also a challenge. We also know that there's very limited studies on this topic. Even though we've been talking about this for the last 15 years, there really is only a handful of studies. And what we do know is that there is no test that I can give that will be consistent with, there's no blood pressure test to prospective memory. There's a few questionnaires, there's a few tests, but there's no one kind of test to assess it. So what I did is I took subjects to my lab to torture them. No, I'm joking. I did not torture anyone, I promise. But what I did do is I brought individuals into the lab with and without diagnosed ADHD. And I asked them to play a Monopoly game. But instead of a regular Monopoly game, they had all these tasks in this virtual day that they had to do that are like pick up a book from the library. They were take out the virtual lasagna from the oven. So they were throwing the dice, and as they were going through this Monopoly board game on the screen, they had these tasks they had to do. Some of the tasks were event-based, some of the tasks were prospective memory, time-based. And surprise, surprise, subjects with ADHD really did bad. Their prospective memory performance was worse than those without ADHD. So they would come into the lab and they won't do as well. And you know what? I also had a few adults without ADHD that came in. So in the same building, we had a memory lab that was an Alzheimer memory research lab. By the way, the sign for that lab, like on the elevator, said, if you don't remember where you're going, the memory lab was on the 3rd floor. I thought that was the best sign ever, best sign ever. But a lot of the time, the individuals that would come to this lab would come with their caregivers. So I had 3 subjects because they were sitting there waiting for their spouses, and usually they were older adults. And I got them to come and play my Monopoly, because I was curious if older adults without ADHD and without Alzheimer, will they do better than the students with ADHD, college students with ADHD, or will they do worse? And what we found is that they did on average better than adults without ADHD. But what was interesting is that they had a fatigue effect. They would start playing the game and they would do better in the beginning. And as the game got longer, they struggled. So they would have, like, versus my individuals with ADHD, I'm going to say something that won't surprise anyone in this audience. They were not consistent. There were times that they did very well, and that there were times that they really struggled. So what do we know from, and just to clarify, this research was in 2011 to 2000, like a while ago. So what do we know now with all the time that passed? We know that consistently individuals with ADHD do worse on PM tasks. Prospective memory is my short version of PM because there's not enough faces on these slides. We also know that they struggle more on the time-based tasks. So if I tell you, take out the lasagna from the oven in 45 minutes, that is harder than say hello next time you see me. So time-based tasks are significantly harder than event-based tasks. We also know that the external cues, okay, are less impaired but still challenged. Okay, so let's say you still say, oh great, my time-based is worse than my event-based, so I'm going to use my event-based. I'm sorry, your event-based is still not as good as the ones without ADHD. Okay, it's just within the time is harder than event. Okay, what else do we know? Oh, do you guys still see this totally? Okay, suddenly we do know that this has a real effect on everyday life. There's a reason I went to study this, because it was affecting me personally, but also there are studies that show that I'm not the only one, that this effect is people that have lower scores in PM with and without ADHD have more academic difficulties, have more missed appointments, have a reduced work-life performance. And then individuals with ADHD in this study showed that they had missed more deadlines, they had forgot more family responsibilities, and they also showed a stronger correlation to having bad prospective memory and everyday life struggles. So, sometimes I find that in academia, we study something, and it doesn't mean it has a real effect on life. The best example was when I was an undergrad, I had a researcher that did a whole study that, I swear, this wasn't a statistic course, but he measured temperature as asphalt in the parking lot and showed that the more the parking lot was hot, the more students end up in emergency rooms. Now, that is a correlation that has no meaning. What causes the temperature of the parking lot to be hot? It is a heat wave. It is hot outside. So students were fainting or getting in the emergency room because they weren't drinking or for the heat. The parking lot was not causing the problem, right? And it couldn't also predict. If I would go every day and measure the parking lot, that's not a good measure of, I can just open the weather app. That's a better measure to predict it. So this is the case where it's not enough to say, people struggle, this is wrong. We also need to show that it has a meaningful effect on everyday life. And this is where we yes, studies show that there is a negative effect. We could have told them that, right? Just one conversation with all of us, they would have figured that out. But we now have also scientific support. Let's talk about the processes that are needed for prospective memory and why is it so hard? So the first one that we need to do, remember we were talking about encoding. Encoding is really critical to be able to collect information. But then there's a retention phase, right? This is the phase where we need to keep the information on ice. If it was a picture of the tree, you have to keep on remembering to look for the tree. Or if it's take the lasagna from the oven. Or my favorite one is pick up milk on the way back from work. You need to hold it. You left in the morning, you didn't have milk, you need to hold that. You have to retain it for a certain amount of time. That's this retention stage. Then we have the retrieval stage. That's the part where we okay, I'm driving in the car. I need to remember. That's kind of when you mumble to yourself, get milk, get milk, get milk, get milk. That's the retrieval stage. Then we need to execute. We need to stop. We need to go in. We need to buy the milk, not leave the grocery store with something else without getting the milk. And this is where a lot of ADHDers struggle. Surprise, surprise. It's in the evaluation phase. It's going back and checking if we did it. It's closing the circle. It's saying when did we figure out we forgot to get the milk? When we're about to make our coffee in the morning or try to serve cereal to the kids. So, because we're not going back and reevaluating it in the right time, in the right place. Okay. This is a very neurotypical view of something. You see how it goes in a straight line? That's not how our brain works. It's just not how, hey, thank you. Someone wrote in the chat that it has been 22 minutes since we started. Thank you for remembering a time-based task. Yoo-hoo. Thank you. I appreciate that. And apparently I'm going quicker than usual because usually this is, so I'm going to try to slow down and take a deep breath and I'm going to actually drink a sip of my water. This is my friend. It's a squirrel because I have ADHD and I get distracted. And he's been coming with me to presentations and conferences. This is my emotional support squirrel. And as a true ADHDer, I have like 5 types of drinks on my desk, and I have not spilled any of them yet today. So yay. But remembering to do that task of the 22 minutes was harder, in my opinion, because the queue was a time-based queue. And there was a lot less of us that did it than the tree. Yes, I love competition. Competition is the best way to get ADHD brains to work. So yay, whoever's competitive. I can't like I'm getting some of the notes, but not all of them. So let me know if there's anything critical. I want to go back to the 5 stages of prospective memory and to the fact that, as you can see, this is kind of a line, because the person that wrote this, Elias, he is obviously a very neurotypical individual, and they think in a straight line. I, as an ADHDer that kind of goes around in circles, I believe that this is not totally how our brain works. I believe that we keep on going back and forth, right? So when we encoded the information, during the rotation, we can go back and we can retrieve it, and then we can encode it again, and we can retain it again, and we can go back and we can execute it, and we can execute it poorly, so we have to go back. There's loops that can happen here again and again. This is not necessarily a one-time thing. And when you think about studying for an exam, what is studying for an exam? It is going back and practicing these loops again and again and again. It's kind of saying, well, maybe I didn't, can I retrieve it? Oh, let's see, let's test myself. Let's do a quiz it, let's answer questions. Let's see if I'm able to retrieve the information. And if I'm able to retrieve the information, great. Then maybe I'll be able to retrieve it again tomorrow. But if I can't, I need to go back and re-encode it and reread it and relearn it. And then I need to remember and store it. And then something is going to cue me to retrieve it again. Maybe the teacher asking the question. And then I kind of need to do something. So when we think about struggles with remembering, the struggles can happen at any point. They can happen at the encoding. I can be distracted when someone gives me the message. They can happen at the retrieval, that retention period. And we're going to talk a lot about that. It can happen in the retrieval. It can happen at the execution, and it can definitely happen in the evaluation. So, and unfortunately, it can happen multiple times. So the more steps there is, there's more chances to fail. So let's talk about encoding and retention and how we can improve it and how we can make this stronger. So if we define prospective memory task in a specific and accountable details. So here's my best example. If I will tell my husband to pick up milk on the way back from work, that is so unspecific in our family because we consume 7 different types of milk. There's an oat milk, and there's a soy milk, and there's a my regular milk that I drink for my coffee, and there's a nut milk, like the shelf one. And there's the little milk thingies that my son takes with him. So if I just say, please buy milk on your way back from work, that is not specific enough for it to happen. So if I give a little more information, and the information needs to be relevant enough so the encoding can be better. So if I say, honey, I need milk for my coffee tomorrow, I did 2 things in that sentence. One is I gave a why. ADHDers encode better, retrieve better, retain better, execute better when they have a why. Now, I didn't give him a whole PhD. Honey, I need the milk because if I don't have the milk, I won't have coffee, and I don't have coffee, I'm going to be tired. If I'm going to be tired, I'm going to... No, like, we lost each other in the process here, right? I give a short why. A very, very short why. It's really important because when I talk with parents, many times they're like, but I told them why. And I'm like, you took 10 minutes to tell them why. Like, they lost you. They just lost you already. So it has to be detailed, but short. And then it needs to be accountable. So if I'm going to put something in my encoding and I want to retrieve it later, I need it to be clear. I can't say something like, when you see people in the future, say hi, say Bob said hello. I need to be more specific. I need to say, like, when you see me in the future, say Bob said hello. Just to clarify, the whole rest of the conference, people passed by me and say, hi, Bob. Bob says hello. Bob says hello because I used this example. So feel free to say Bob says hello next time you see me. But my point is that if you don't give the message in a clear, specific way, it will be hard to remember it. Then write it down. Why does writing down help our brain? Writing down helps our brain in several ways. The first and the most important way is our working memory is not working. So if we write something down, we're removing it from the non-functional component. That's one way. The other way is it uses more sensors. So the more information that we can use from that, remember the semantic sensory memory, that if we can use more senses to encode the information, there's a higher likelihood that we will remember it. So if we write something down, if we walk around singing it, head, keys, toe, I don't know if you guys ever do that. When you leave the house, I go, like, I check that I have my sunglasses, I go head, shoulders, I look that I took my bag, I look in my, pockets instead of the knees, I do pockets, I check that I have my keys and my phone, and then I do toes because I walk out of the house otherwise sometimes without shoes. So, like, that's my toes. So the idea is that I'm using, like, my senses to try to remember. So writing it down serves the same kind of purpose. Saying it out loud is what I just said. That was that example. And then reducing reliance on working memory. I am short, you guys can't see it here, so I don't expect that I'll be a successful basketball player. That is my physical limitation. I might enjoy it. I don't, but I might. But understanding that we have capacities and strengths and abilities, and then working with our strengths and abilities. I was a great dancer. Short, petite, small, loved it. I was not a great basketball player. Doesn't mean I couldn't enjoy it, but I can't rely on my basketball skills to make a living. So when we know our working memory is not functioning, we're trying to rely on a skill that is not strong. We're trying to make a living on something that's not functioning. And when we struggle and when we fail, and we will fail, we also get mad at ourselves. And that I would love to reduce. That getting mad at ourselves is really important. We have a limited working memory capacity, and we should not rely on it. And when it fails, we should not be mad at ourselves. We should say, next time, I should have wrote it down, or I should have said it loud, or I should have used a strategy, instead of saying, oh my God, I'm a terrible person for forgetting. Oh my God, I don't the language that we're talking to ourselves needs to change. It needs to focus on positive changes. What can we do? I forgot one of my friend's birthdays. I can put it in the calendar. I can apologize. There's a lot I can do, but understanding that it's not from, I don't like that person, or I don't care. So what can we do about cues? I'm going to take another sip of water. Excuse me for 2 seconds. Okay. So I don't know if, oh, I see my tree people. Thank you. Here's what happens many times when I give this presentation. There's people that write tree and remember and pay attention, are very excited, they did it. There's people that are frustrated at me, like, you didn't say there's going to be more than one tree. They're very, very mad at me, very, very mad at me. To the people who come up to me at the end of the talk, like, you did not give good instructions. Yes, good cues. That's really what I want to talk about. If I would have told you in the beginning, there's going to be more than one tree, it would have been easier for you to pay attention to the tree. Because I did not give you good instructions, you have higher chances to fail. So I really encourage you guys, when you're thinking about how to remember something in the future, thinking about what's going to cue it. What is it going to be the thing that's going to help me know that I need to do it? Oh, I'm going to be passing the grocery store. So how am I going to, like, what's going to help to cue that? Oh, maybe instead of just saying grocery store, I'm going to say something more specific. I'm going to say, when I'm passing the Trader Joe's with the weird parking lot, I need to stop. Okay? That already made it a little more specific. Is it a good enough cue? Not necessarily. You can also make a cue that can be even better. You can put a Post-it. You can put the Trader Joe bag in the car next to you. You can put the empty carton of milk. You can put a picture of your bad wife because she didn't have milk for her coffee next to you. All of those would be better cues than just saying, oh yeah, right, at the end of the workday, I will be able to focus and remember to stop at the grocery store and get milk. So making the cue a good cue is it has to be distinct. It has to be highly noticeable. It has to be relevant. So it's not going to help if I leave the Post-it to the milk in the house when I'm going to be somewhere else. So it has to be relevant. My best example was when my kid was smaller. I was trying to drink more water when I was nursing, but I always had the phone with the reminder in the other room. Like, really? Seriously? How was that helping? So putting the cue to execute it next to us usually usually is helpful. And then there's something about immediacy. Our brain needs things to be in the right time frame. So it won't help if I tell you about the tree and then you guys suddenly, the next speaker next month, let's say they have a tree and suddenly you write tree on the thing. So that's obviously not going to be relevant. And then consistently with your daily routine. I put reminders inside my shoes that I'm going to put by the door. I needed to remember to buy something at the hardware store. I literally put a screwdriver in the shoe to kind of that was very distinct. It was highly noticeable. There was nowhere I was going to go with that in my shoe. It was context relevant. It was immediate because I was going to go right into the car. Okay. And it was consistent with my daily routine because I have to put on shoes to go out to go to the store. So in order to do all that, I had to do some detective work. I had to figure out what is a good cue, what would be a good place, what would be relevant. And that is not easy. That requires effort. So then if I forget something, instead of telling myself, oh, I am so bad, I keep on forgetting, I have the worst memory, I want to say to myself, I did not put the effort in remembering. I did not put the cues distinct enough. I did not use a good noticeable cue. Or, you know what, that screwdriver in the shoe was not enough because by the minute I got into the car, I got distracted with Waze, I got distracted with the news, maybe I need something better. So that's going back to the end and evaluating where can I do better without putting the guilt, the shame, and then another important thing I'm going to say before I forget, this is what we can model to our kids. If you are parents and you are raising a teenager and you want to teach them how to remember better, or you're a coach or a doctor, this is the place where we can support people the best. We can help them figure out how to make good cues, cues that are relevant for themselves. And we can model our own cues in our everyday life. We can say out loud, I'm putting the stupid Post-it on my forehead so I won't forget. Okay, I swear, I think 3M is surviving on me, or maybe all us ADHDers. But my point is that this is a place where that we can improve, that we can teach, we can learn. This is an educational component. Okay, how can we improve retrieval? If we make our cues clear enough, there are higher chances that we will retrieve them. If we make them multiple sensory, there's a study out there that shows that we do better with visual cues, actually. I'm going to say bullshit. I'm going to call that study bullshit. We do better with multiple sensory cues. So I have to remember to pick up when my kids were smaller, and I was working full time at Loyola University, and I had to remember to pick up my kids. My alarm to pick up the kids was a sound, very distinct sound of like aliens coming, like the whatever. I'm not going to sing. I love you guys. I'm not going to sing. So that sound, I did it with a flashing light. You can do some alarms with a light, and that reminded me, like, the sound was distinct. It was the only reason I used it was for picking up the kids. And it was worked so well that I was sitting in some meeting and someone else's alarm like that went off, and I turned around and I'm like, oh, I have to go. My kids are going to turn into picked up by aliens if I don't leave. And they were like, wait, that wasn't your alarm. So it has to be distinct enough. It has to be unique enough. But look what I did. I took a time-based task. I was supposed to leave at 2:30 to pick up my kids, and I made it an event. I made it about aliens. I changed it from time to event. Now, I also had time. I still could have looked at my watch. I still could have used time. I didn't cancel time, but I made it into an event. So events are really good for us compared to time. So if I need to take out the lasagna from the oven, and I put a reminder, but I also put a post-it. I also make a visual thing. I literally sometimes, if it's something really critical, I would keep the mitten from on one of my hands, the kitchen, so it will help me remember. So I added another sensory retrieval. So layer multiple cues. And then there's an effect of the ongoing task. So the more demanding the ongoing task is, the harder it is to retrieve in time. There was a study where they took the pilots training, like they were training to become pilots, and they taught them this whole landing ritual, and then they did a test. They passed already. They know the landing ritual. And then they asked them to do, in there, they were told math problems in the earbuds while they were trying to do this ritual that they already know. When the math problems are very simple, like 5 divided by 1, like, simple, 1 plus 1, no effect on the ongoing task. When the math problems were complex, then the ongoing task started to struggle. This is what happens when you're trying to talk with your spouse and they're doing something else. And if it's something that they care about, it will be harder to encode, it will be harder to retrieve, it will be harder to execute. So we need to know, as people that live in the world, that the ongoing task will affect. So if we know that we're going to be watching our favorite TV show and we need to remember to leave the house, we need to make sure that those cues are really, really good and they're really, really meaningful and really, really strong, because our ongoing task is such a grabbing task. If we're doing something boring, maybe we need less cues, okay? So there's an effect to ongoing task. When we fail sometimes, we can understand that when we fail sometimes and we look back and we do the detective work to see what caused the struggle, sometimes it was the ongoing task was just so dopamine in creating. It was so much fun, and the cues were not good enough. Okay, I need to kind of now I went too slow and I need to go a bit quicker. So we need to recognize how the ongoing task will affect our performance. And then we need to understand that repetition, yes, 3 people, thank you. So now we only had 2 people talking about the tree. What happened? Repetition is not always our friend. Repetition is sometimes our enemy. We think about repetition as the greatest gift. Oh yeah, we'll repeat doing it again and again, it will become easier. It will also become boring and not distinct and not interesting. So repetition is not always our friend. And then repetition is something that we can use for benefits. So wait, isn't that contradiction? Yes, that is what life is full of, those kind of contradictions. This is one of them. If I teach something more times, if I repeat the word cue enough times, maybe I'll figure out how to pronounce it correctly. So repetition can be useful, but it also can be our enemy. So understanding that and learning the case of when repetition is helping us versus interfering. The problem is not what you forget, but what your spouses remember. So what am I trying to say about that? That forgetting itself is not bad. It's when we forget things that affect the people in our life. When we forget someone's birthday, when we forget to come to a meeting, when we forget to pay a bill, that forgetfulness is where the negativeness comes. It's not the forgetting itself that's the problem. It's the effect it has on our everyday life. So we need to remember that we have knowledge that we created today about how our brain works that we can share with others. We can talk with our spouse, our work partner, our friend, and we can say things like, I need a better cue to remember this. My working memory is shitty. Can you text me that? We can say when we fail, instead of saying, oh, I'm such a terrible friend, we can say, I am so proud that up until now, this is the first time I forgot, and I'm really, really hoping that you'll forgive me for this forgetfulness, because, oh boy, I really been putting a lot of effort in trying to avoid it, but it still happens. And it happens because this is my weakness, and not because I didn't want to share. And we also need to remember that there's a cost. This is the ADHD tax. I don't know if you ever heard of the ADHD tax. It's when you're paying extra taxes, you're spending more money, you're spending more energy to do something that for other people is not as hard. So it will come in social effects. It will come at work. It will come in how much strategies you need to put to do things that other people do automatically, like sing a song to leave the house. So I think that we need to remember that, and remember that forgetfulness is not the enemy by itself, but it's more the consequence that we're worried about. And saying that, until 1920, we really had limited knowledge about forgetfulness. And this is the forgetfulness curve, one of my favorite curves. This is a curve that shows that they gave a list, like, of course, this was all white men in England, but never mind. They gave a list of people that came into a lab, a list of words. I always joke, they should have given it to a bunch of women. They would have remembered more. But it's not true. This is true for every gender, every race, actually, every culture. You give them a list of more than 7 words, and they forget immediately. And I mean immediately. After a minute, without trying to repeat it, 60% of it. And then 20 minutes later, we're down more. And if we go all the way to 6 days, 31 days, there's this curve. That's the forgetfulness curve. In order for us to not forget things, we have to put effort. We have to, conscious or unconscious effort has to happen in our brain in order to not forget things. Okay. So how do we fight the forgetfulness curve? We reinforce with repetition, with encoding again and again. You know how your kid likes to listen to the same book that you read again and again, or you like to listen to the same music. You're doing reinforcement. Improve clarity of instructions, make it relevant, make it more interesting and interactive. So like me asking you guys to pay attention to the tree was a way for me to try to make this interactive, even though we're like, each of us is on our own screen. And then practice any skill that we try to practice will help fight the forgetfulness curve. Okay, we're really running out of time. External memory aids, reminders, alarms, sticky notes, visual cues. I use every type of sticky note you can imagine. Small little ones that can have one word. Those are the ones I use in the car because I don't want to have to read a PhD in the car. And I use big ones in my office that are 3M poster size sticky notes. So anything, and you can buy a sticky note that looks like a watch and then you can write things on it. And I do that a lot with the kids I work with. You can buy these like sticky notes that are like, they look like a wristwatch, and you can write message on them and then stick them on your hand. Digital assistants, like telling Alexa, Alexa, put this in the grocery, Alexa, remind me, like that kind of thing. Virtual body doubling, telling someone, like I took virtual here because I was talking about memory aids, but you can tell your spouse, your friend, person you meet, hey, remind me this and this. They now suddenly became your external memory aid. And then, of course, we have habit trackers or different task management apps that we can use to try to reduce the working memory load. If I'm going to mark every time I drink a water on the app, I'm not going to have to try to use that in my memory capacity. Did I drink enough water? Oops, sorry. Okay, we talked a lot about prospective memory today with ADHD. I want to say that, hey, here's some very not good news. There's a lot of things that affect our prospective memory. Aging, being sick, any medical condition. If you take antibiotics, your prospective memory performance goes. Having a chronic medical condition, having back pain, brain injuries, definitely negative. Car accidents, concussions, definitely. Pregnancy, sorry, very negative effect on prospective memory. Sleep, and just being a woman, different stages of your cycle, and the list continues. I just wanted to keep this list short because I was trying to not overwhelm you with information, because the next slide has a ton of information. So, and I took this example because I kept on getting asked this a lot in different conferences, so I wanted to share this slide. I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but there's one study in Norway, and we do studies in Norway because they have public health, and you have a lot of data there. And they looked at people before COVID and after COVID. They were in this big memory research, and no one knew that people have COVID in the middle. So we couldn't control, right? People came into the lab, then they got COVID, and then they came into the lab a year later because that was what they were supposed to do. And what we found is that the people that had long-term COVID showed significant prospective memory challenges up to 36 months after having COVID. So just going to put it out there. It's one study in one country. We couldn't control a lot of things in this study. It's a correlation. But this is just an example of how medical conditions can have very long-term effects on our memory. Okay, we're going to play a true and false. So this true and false game is oops. I'm going to put a question, and you guys are going to have to tell me if it's true or false. You can write it. You can just... So is it true individuals with ADHD often experience challenges with prospective memory? Yes. Thank you. Is it true that prospective memory cues can be easier to retrieve if we... Making prospective memory cues easy to retrieve can improve the likelihood of success. Yep, definitely. Prospective memory performance can be improved by increasing our awareness to it. So just by attending this talk, you might improve some prospective memory skills. True. Time-based prospective memory tasks tend to be more challenging than event-based. Whoever marked true, you are correct. The demand of ongoing tasks can affect our working memory performance. Our prospective memory performance. Well, also our working memory, but yes, our prospective memory in this case. And my favorite question, I learned something about memory today. So if you have 60 million questions, or even just one, you can reach me at dk@adhdtime.com. If you didn't get to scan the thing in the beginning about how the different memory types cheat sheet, then you can use that to scan it. If for some reason it didn't work, feel free to email me. And then there's a slide that we're not going to be talking about today, but I just wanted to put it here. There's location-based alerts you can do on your phones. And I've been using them a lot in order to avoid paying library fines, because now every time I drive by the library, it dings and it reminds me to return library books. So 2 years of no fines. I think I deserve a crown, but this is what I do. It's a location based. When my kids were smaller, I used it to I did it like a block from the kids' school, and it used to say like, did you have a kid still in the back seat? It's a location-based thing to help me. It's not bulletproof. You have to still pay attention to it. You still have to execute. At some point, you need to change the words because you're going to get bored. But it is another strategy that you have if you're walking around with some phones. Okay? I'm going to go back to the other slide for questions and for you guys in case you need this. And thank you for having me.
That was fantastic, Daniella. Oh my God, I learned so much stuff.